Namaste everyone. Thank you for joining today's Wisdom Wednesday discussion. We will start with one Omkar followed by the Gayatri Mantra. Om Bhur Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat.
Thank you, Ritik, for starting us off with the Gayatri Mantra. Today is another day to explore a new topic with our experts and students. Thank you to all who have tuned in from your homes. We have previously dived into various different discussions on a vast range of topics. And today we have another unique topic that we haven't discussed before. And this is the students and music. And as we enter our discussion, I'd just like to take the opportunity to run through our format for this evening and introduce our student representatives and our guest speaker. Before I do that, I will run briefly through the format. So we will begin with a 20 to 30 minute Q&A discussion, and then we will have an opportunity to receive questions from yourself, the audience. And we encourage you to add your questions and thoughts into the comments, and we will touch upon this later on in the evening. And also, don't forget to like and share so this discussion can reach wide and fast. So that's the overall format of this evening, and I'd love to introduce our guest speaker for today. Today we are honored to be joined by Yogeshji. Yogeshji Joshi is a project consultant for the Technology Services Group and is an avid listener of spoken word, literature, music, and philosophy. He grew up listening to Indian classical music from a young age. He is also the executive director and president of Shruti Art, one of the leading South Asian art organizations based in Leicester, and has taken the organization towards a greater community engagement. He believes passionately about making the arts accessible to the community, music enthusiasts at all different levels. He has also worked with many musicians and steered a number of multi-art form productions. Welcome, Yogeshji.
Namaste. Thank you very much indeed.
And from our students this week, we have myself. So my name is Deepika Ananda, and I'm a graduate of biochemistry from the University of Sheffield. And I currently hold responsibility as one of the National General Secretaries of NHS UK. And today we also have joining us Ritik Joshi from Manchester. He's a student of music, so very fitting for this conversation, at the University of Manchester, and is also a Sanskar coordinator on the Manchester Hindu side. So welcome to all. We shall now begin our discussions. But before we dive into the kind of deep questions, we would love to actually ask you, Yogeshji, for the benefit of our audience, if you would be able to give us some insight into a summary, if you will, of Hindustani classical music.
Absolutely, Deepika. For the audience that's joined us from the UK and on Facebook Live, I'd like to say you've actually used the term South Hindustani classical music. So you've actually given us one parameter. But Indian classical music, as we know it, is actually a rich tradition of music, both of Hindustani tradition, which is popularly known as the North Indian classical music, and the Carnatic music, which is the South Indian. Both date back to several thousand years to the Vedas, and you will find origins of our music in their original Vedic chants, in the hymns there. And much of what we have carried through over the last several thousand years is in actually song form, poetry form, literature form. And that's why much of our literature and music survives to this day in its current context.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Just to follow up to that question then, what are the kind of fundamentals, essentially, of Indian classical music then?
The fundamentals are that Indian classical music is based on melody, harmony, and rhythm. So we all recognize those things within ourselves. We may not be exponents of articulating those things in our lives, or in a musical way, but we have an inherent understanding of what those things mean, and we experience them. So, for example, when we listen to a song or we sing a song, we say, oh, it sounds melodious, means it's pleasing to the ear. The words and the sound and the structure of music within that is inherently pleasing to us. With melody comes rhythm as well. So we see a sense of beat. And what better beat can there be than the one that is actually within us, the heartbeat itself? So we have our own time clock, we have our own heartbeat, and any beat that resonates so closely to our heartbeat is one that appeals. So we have melody, we have rhythm, and then we have compositions and so on, and harmony. So those are the structures and components that make music. We don't necessarily need to know those things and need to know how the process works. We simply need to listen, and if we enjoy those things, then music appeals.
Thank you, Yogeshi, for an interesting explanation on Hindustani Indian music. So now there are often various experiences with all of us with Hindustani Indian music, whether it's in the family or going to the mandir and so forth.
Sure.
In my opinion, well, for me, with my father being a musician, I've always been brought up with Hindustani classical music in the house, been playing rags, and now I'm currently taking it full time. How has your upbringing in your music household influenced you? And widely, what impacts does music have in the family sphere?
I grew up listening to Indian classical music. I had no formal training in music. My father was very much interested in classical music, and my siblings, my sister and my brother, they sing very well. I listen to them. And from a very young age, it was quite natural and normal for us to listen to rag-based music, Indian classical music, whether it was vocal, whether it was instrumental, so sitar, sarod, santur, flute. Listen to vocalists like the late Pandit Bhimsen Joshi, uh, Devki Pandit, for example. So all these musicians are almost like second nature. The names are second nature, the music is second nature to me. And yet throughout this journey of mine, I have always been a listener. I've never actually undertaken the process of learning an instrument or learning how to sing, because I felt I could never actually do that. I could never actually achieve the articulation needed to become a musician myself. But I've been passionate listener, and I've imbibed a lot about music through listening. And I think we can all imbibe that learning by listening to music. Uh, However, the journey of my music has evolved and changed in the last 15, 20 years since my association with a lot of musicians and working with them. But I'll elaborate on that later on in the discussion that we're having, because that's an interesting kind of foray into how my musical journey has taken me. My early years have obviously been listening to a lot of music, and I think that has ingrained and kind of colored my musical journey at a young age, and that color is very, very bright and very, very glowing, and I look back on that as my foundation.
Wonderful. I love the idea of it coloring your journey as well. I guess also then, there are various experiences, like you mentioned, that different individuals will have. So some people grow up in a musical household or have been listening to music, but some people, on the other hand, do not listen to music at all. How does the inclusion of music in the household or in our daily routines impact us?
That's a very interesting question, Deepika, because over the last sort of 30 years or so in kind of witnessing music in certain households and certain communities within the Indian culture or the Indian diaspora. I come from a Gujarati family, and within the wider Gujarati sphere, I sense that, as now I see and I sense that music is perhaps sporadic and not as perhaps so formally taught and structured as in some other cultures or some other Indian states. I know through experience that I have a lot of friends who are musicians who belong to the Maharashtrian community. I have a lot of friends who are also from Calcutta and Bengal. And in their households, I have seen and I have witnessed and I've known that music has been an integral part of their growing up. And when I say an integral part of growing up, what I mean by that is that for them, learning the harmonium at the age of 6, 7, learning to sing at a young age, and formal learning, not just by trial and error, but actual formal learning, is quite a common thing. It's a very, very known thing. And you find that those children who go through a formal musical learning at a very young age will develop an articulation. It may not necessarily express itself immediately, but it will certainly express itself and manifest itself later in life. And it's one of the biggest solace and one of the biggest uniting thing for oneself and within oneself. So I see that they have a language which is so much more enhanced than those that simply don't have a formal learning. I'm not saying that one is right or wrong. It's just the way things are. And my experience now says to me that formal music learning should be an integral part of most families, because I think it enriches us. I think it's a very enriching process, and one that enables us to enjoy music even more.
Thank you, Yogesh. You talked about formal learning an instrument starting from a very young age. How would you instill like a formal lessons for like the older generation? Because a lot of us, when we start getting older, we want to start playing it as a hobby, playing an instrument as a hobby, and we always have that one song that we want to learn. How do we instill a more formal learning curve to it?
See, Ritik, most of our engagement with the instruments, especially instruments, singing, we will all attempt from one time to the other. We will be driving and we'll be kind of humming a tune, or we're walking and we're humming a tune. But with instrument, it's quite a different journey. With instrument, we have to have a little bit of awareness as to how the actual instrument itself, how to play it. So really, I don't necessarily mean that we must sit down and have a very structured lesson all the time. If somebody is gifted and intuitively has a sense of connection with an instrument, whether it be a tabla or a sitar or a trombone or a piano, then that's absolutely fine. Whether we learn to play a song that we like, or we try and emulate a song or copy a song, it's absolutely fine. I don't necessarily believe that we have to adhere to a structure or a forced structure at an early age. But I certainly feel that a little bit of structure with a little bit of talent combined goes a very long way. And you see many of the musicians that we say are remarkable musicians or very great musicians have a combination of talent, hard work, formal training, of course, but they approach these things with a passion. I suppose when we're young, we don't necessarily like to practice the scales. I believe you play piano, do you not, Ritik? So practicing scales on a piano, you could say that it's not the most exciting of things. But I'm sure that when you practice your scales enough times, it'll evolve into some kind of musicality over years. So we don't necessarily see the value of practice initially, but we will see its benefits later on. And when we see its benefits, we will see music in there. It's when we start to see music in our practice, then suddenly we make a connection with what we have done, from a learning point of view.
Some wonderful thoughts there, Yogesh-ji, of how we can make that connection at any time if there's that kind of thirst to have that keenness to explore it a bit further as well. I guess also then you touched upon how with this practice you begin to see the music. So that kind of links nicely to our next question, which with our discussions yesterday, we talked a bit about how different artists and different musicians can come together and make a variety of different types of music. So How, in your opinion, has music evolved over time, and how has it been shaped by different influences?
I'll recall my experience of the last sort of 15, 20 years working with musicians. When I grew up listening to classical music, I remember vividly that I would listen to a rag piece for, say, 45 minutes to an hour, hour and a half. And I was absolutely fine. I would go to a concert and listen to an artist perform. And I knew the kind of time scale it would, evolve. It'll be at least an hour, hour and a half before I could think of one rag completing. And the musicians themselves, their background, their experience was so much into the purity of their art that they rarely deviated from that. However, I've noticed in the last 20 years or so, 15, 20 years or so, the classical musicians themselves have begun to realize the changing audiences and what the audience will be able to, I suppose, digest and take on board. So their performances are shorter. They bring in a much wider experiences of musical genres, because the contemporary classical musicians are not just in the classical realm. They also do popular music. They also do different genres of music, and they bring those genres in their classical performances. One of the things that we do at Shruti Arts is a festival called Utsav, a classical spring fest. And one of the drivers of that festival is short, punchy, classical performances. Now, if I approached a classical musician of the likes of the stalwarts, the geniuses, they would laugh me off stage. They would say, no way, a rag has to take at least an hour, hour and a half. Whereas the contemporary musician, I can have a conversation and say that, can we play a rag for about 15, 20 minutes? And can we then do this? And can we evolve into this kind of a jugalbandi, means playing in unison together? So they are much more aware of what the audience is seeking and what the audience connects with. That's the most important thing. And again, it's not an intellectual process, it's an experiential process. So they bring into their performances experiences that they had themselves whilst they were growing up, learning music and learning about different genres. And this is the remarkable change that I have seen and witnessed in our own Indian classical musical journey. I can't speak about Western classical, but I've seen and I've worked with a few Western musicians who've given me similar anecdotes and told me similar stories. That's not to say that the contemporary classical musicians are any less than the stalwarts. Just in case the audience thinks that I'm actually advocating contemporary classical musicians over the stalwarts. No, it's a different approach. It's a different experience. And the contemporary musicians are as good as our stalwarts. And the contemporary will become the stalwarts one day too.
Thank you, Yogesh. So you talk about there being like different musician circles, so like the contemporary classical composers, we've got the Hindustani. So we've got so many different genres of music these days. So pop, Hindustani, Bollywood. Do you not think that with there being so many genres which are being created every single day, every year, in some way it divides us as a community? Because in my experience, I'm more of an instrumental based listener, composer, and I do sometimes find it hard to I find it hard to have conversations with those who are more lyrical based, those who listen to pop and hip hop. So what are your thoughts on that, having different genres?
I do not believe that the different genres or the evolving genres, as you put it, actually create any divides. I believe it offers a variety of music. It's a whole spectrum of color. If you imagine the rainbow has so many colors, it may be that you connect with a certain type of music, but let's say, for example, I think we spoke about this yesterday or the day before, is that, let's say, for example, in the morning when we get up, we may like calm, soothing, devotional music. In the afternoon, that genre of music may not appeal to us. We may want drive time, in the afternoon. And then on the way back home from work, we may listen to something else, maybe rock and pop or garage, or maybe something completely different, or classic FM, for example. Now, what's happened is that you pick up different genres of music based on your own temperament and mood and the time of the day. So if you're feeling that you want to be calm and at peace with yourself, for example, you may not necessarily listen to the rock album in the morning. You may listen to some devotional song, for example. Every form of genre or musical genre appeals to some individual or the other, and it appeals to us at different times in our lives, in our day, in our growing, in our journey. So even as a young person, you may find that at the moment you connect with the piano and you connect with lyrics that actually complement what you are learning. 10 years down the line, you may find that you actually like the piano, but you like the melodic aspect, the harmony within the piano. And you may find that actually you work better with composers who reflect a kind of a different flavor to piano. So as we evolve in our own lives, our taste and our perception about what is actually good or of appeal to me changes. So I don't believe that musical genres create a divide. On the contrary, I believe they offer us a variety of rich musical experiences. I know people can get very passionate about attending a rock concert, or attending even a classical concert for that matter. But passion is one thing, but it certainly doesn't create a divide, as in factions, and doesn't actually put people at loggerheads with each other, saying that why do you like this and why do you not like that. I think that people like different things at different times in their lives, even different times of the day. So I think different genres are good. In fact, I think it's a very positive thing that people are constantly evolving. It shows the creativity within individuals.
That's a lovely explanation, Yogeshji. Just before we ask you the next question, just a reminder for the audience to drop your comments in the chat below, so Yogeshji can have a crack at answering some of your questions. Yogeshji, you mentioned the different kind of musical genres and the different experiences they bring about. Would you say that there are certain types of music that can be used to better our well-being?
I believe so. I believe so indeed. Again, experiences and what we all hear. I often go for walks early in the morning, and I used to listen to talking books, for a couple of months, and then I thought, no, I'm not actually enjoying this at all. And then I started listening to meditative music, for example, and then very light sort of flute and santoor and sitar, and almost like a kind of a passive listening. Then I thought, actually, I don't want that either. Actually, let's take that off. Let's listen to the sounds of nature. So it's about connecting with music as our moods go. It's not about a particular genre that is remarkable or the other is non-remarkable. It's our own experiences. If we're at peace with ourselves, we don't need perhaps any music, because silence itself provides the greatest of music. And then there are other emotions that we'd like to connect with. Some music will enhance and help us to create a mood. When we go to the mandir, for example, I'm sure that in some mandirs there are some chants playing in the background, some devotional songs playing in the background. They are there to help us to create an ambience, to help our mind achieve a sense of connect with the place we are at, with the divinity and the presence of divinity that we are in. If we want to, say, for example, connect with somebody who is across the world and is struggling, for example, we will put on a music that kind of gives you fervor and passion and courage and songs that, for example, songs of Deshbhakti, for example, to kind of stir passion in individuals. So what happens is that music, when connected with words, take on a different meaning. If you take words out of music, then music has a different kind of appeal. You know, like morning meditative music has no words. But if people are going to war, or if people have been stirred into passion or stirred into action, they have Desh Bhakti Geet. Or if there's a devotional mood to be stirred up, there is devotional singing or devotional songs, like the songs of Mirabai and Kabir, Tulsidas, and so on. So each facet kind of connects with our inner self. And those people who compose those things were not simply clever, but they were intuitively very experienced about life. And they reflected that in their words. And people also reflect that in their music. So those people who compose meditative music know the effect of that music on our minds and temperaments. Just as those people who wrote the Desh Bhakti Geet know what it will do to our emotions. And Tulsidas knows that when somebody recites this particular verse, what it will do to them.
Thank you, Yogeshji. So now linking this to our theme of the month, word of the month, which is harmony.
Mm-hmm.
So when I normally think of harmony in a music context, I always think of instruments playing simultaneously to create a grander, a bigger sound, a more pleasant sound. So what are your thoughts on the word harmony, firstly, and how does it play its role in the music sphere and beyond?
That's a very interesting question, Ritik, and I will I have learned about harmony from a musician whom I've known for the last 15, 20 years now. His name is Shri Ashit Desaiji and Hema Desaiji and Alap Desaiji. We undertook a project of vocal singing in a group. And it was through those workshops and the way he actually explained how harmony works. I'll tell you how we differ, because what it is that in Indian music, melody and rhythm are primary. In Western music, and this is a very layman's explanation, so don't take that as the absolute. And in the Western format, it's the harmony or the harmonics. Essentially, harmonization is listening to a sound in collectivity, which has actually melody and rhythm imbibed within it. It's not devoid of it. So when we listen to something that's harmonized well, okay, when we say it's in harmony, we say it's in tune with itself. Okay, we say, oh, that's in perfect harmony. What we mean to say is that melody is there, rhythm is there, and so is the complete sense of balance. That harmony relates to the harmony within ourselves. Remember, music is about experience. So this entire process of creating music that has wonderful melody or rhythm or harmony is all about connecting to our emotions. And the one that connects most successfully to our emotion is the one that is in complete harmony, which has all these three elements within it. And that's why you talked about orchestration, I think, briefly, just in your question there. And we see, if you've been to a Western classical concert, as many of you would have gone to, we see that there are 11 strings and pianos and cellos and wind and so on. When you hear the complete sound, the totality of that experience is a sense of harmony. We don't necessarily need to know the process of how that came about. That's the job of the conductor, the music director, the music composer. As far as we, the listeners, are concerned, we are actually experiencing music in its totality. So when the violins play, it says, wow, what a wonderful sound that is. And in between the violins, the flute will suddenly go off. And in between that sound, the rhythm will suddenly start and the piano will come in. So that complete picturization, that complete harmony that the composer has created has been conveyed to you as a musical picture. So if we close our eyes, we can almost visualize all those elements as well as the complete and totality of the musical picture, which we call harmony.
What a wonderful way to summarize what harmony means to you in the concept of music as well. Very well put. So what we'll do now is we'll open up to our Facebook questions. So lots of our audience members have inputted questions, and we will have the first question from Avnish Mistry, who was asked, how important is it to stick to the traditions of classical music today in the modern music sphere?
I believe that traditions are very important in any form, not necessarily just music, but I think tradition offers us a certain foundation. However, we are evolving human beings. We evolve. We change with time. And so does music. Music evolves with time as well. Whilst we can maintain the tradition, we shouldn't be so steadfast that we are not able to adapt changing and evolving ideas. We certainly need a core foundation. If we don't have the core foundation, then our journey of music or the musical flight is limited to a point. But if you have trained as a musician and had some formal training, then those that have trained will vouch and validate that their experience will say that I can actually perform, I can actually do quite a lot of things. I understand music differently. And that's because they have allowed themselves to undergo a process of training which has strengthened their building blocks. So their foundation is very strong. It's not necessarily tradition, it's about creating a platform, a very, very strong foundation. Now, whether you develop that foundation in Western classical music or Indian classical music is not really as relevant as having a foundation. I know a lot of Indian classical musicians who have a foundation in Western classical music formally. They've gone to, so say, for example, the Royal College of Music. Piano has been their main instrument. And yet now, through their journey, their musical journey, they are an exponent of Indian classical music too. Why? Because they gave themselves the benefit of an amazing foundation. And with that foundation, they can choose to fly east or they can choose to fly west. And they can fly in both directions simultaneously if they wanted to, and explore both the genres. So they can play Beethoven on the piano, and they can play Rag Yaman equally well, without it sounding like a cacophony of chaotic sounds. It sounds beautiful. So that's what foundation does.
I think just whilst you were kind of answering that question about foundations, reminded me of yesterday something you mentioned about how essentially music has no barriers. So that fluidity between different kind of genres and different ways of experiencing different types of music is always open. And that kind of, from leading on from that then, how does that bring people together? Because I know we touched upon a few times the different communities that you've seen firsthand from your experience as well. How does music allow that to happen?
If we see our annual calendar, the Indian calendar throughout the year, we see that there are certain highlights. Okay, nothing unites the community like a wonderful Navratri. You don't have to be musical. You don't have to know the music itself. The moment we enter the auditorium where Navratri is being sung, for example, the Ras and the Garba are being sung, immediately something happens. The tick happens here. We start clicking our fingers, because it's something so intuitively connecting with us. So we don't necessarily feel that, oh, I am a Punjabi, so I cannot go to Navratri, or I'm a Gujarati, so I cannot do a Bhangra, for example, or I can't do Rabindra Sangeet, for example. Different genres are very easy to connect to. Within the genres, though, there are some very, very popular highlights. You know, today, if we talk about Indian music, if we ask a question to a non-Indian, or we ask a question about Indian music to a Western audience, their experience and their connect is at either Indian classical music, and they will probably give you names of a few instrumentalists, but most of their experiences seem to be Bollywood music. And most of the Bollywood experiences seem to be Punjabi, Bhangra style type of music. Now, you and I can say that Bollywood music has a vast array of genres. We have the classical, we have the folk, we have the regional, but one word, Bollywood, seems to summarize the entire genre of Indian music to most people now. To you and I, and to a lot of people who may perceive that as kind of misleading Indian music or misrepresenting Indian music, we may feel really, you know, our passion stirred up, and that's not really Indian music at all. Actually, that's only film music. But film music also has its origin in Indian classical music. It has its origin in regional Indian music, in the folk tradition of India, in the cultural vibrancy of India. You know, there's a very famous music director of India. His name was Naushad Ali, and he gave music that actually was very akin to and close to the soil of India, the true flavor of what Indian culture was about. His music had classicism, had classical, had folk, had regional, and had popularity. So you can see he's traversed a whole array of genres. He didn't stick to just classical in Indian movies. He didn't stick to just regional. He took elements of every aspect of India and Indian music and Indian culture and weaved a tapestry so beautiful that his music appealed to one and all. Now, even 50 years hence, we listen to some compositions by Naushad. We think, wow, is that what he did in the 50s and 60s? That's quite incredible. The kind of thing that I suppose A.R. Rahmanji is doing now. I'm not making any comparisons here. It's been able to take from your roots and translating that into a meaningful language for everybody.
Thank you, Yogeshi. We have another question from the audience. So, what is the effect of learning classical music on mental well-being? So, classical music, I'm assuming it's instrumental classical, so Western classical.
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe that there is a definite relationship between the two. I'll just highlight a little process that a lot of music teachers tell their students to do. You're a music student, so you will relate to this. They will say that every morning or whenever you practice, you've got to practice a certain set of scales. Then you've got to practice a certain set of long notes. Then you've got to practice a certain sets of alankars, for example. In the initial phase of learning, we simply see those as little elements. We only see those as little notes. We don't see any connect between one piece of alankar to the next piece of alankar, or we don't see a connect with the patterns that we are being shown. However, if we stick at it long enough and carry on, that practice of alankar and the patterns will evolve a sense of music within us. We don't know when that transformation will happen. When that happens, the struggle of the practice results in music. And when that happens, the immense joy that you experience as a result of music and musical journey creates an amazing mental well-being for you. That is for somebody who's a musician and has taken a musical journey. Also, if you're a listener, if you're a listener and you feel that I don't have a musical, I'm not learning music formally. I am simply engaging with music by listening. Then you find that you will select certain types of music that appeals to your temperament. Um, Experiments have been done, and a lot of people actually play soothing music, for example. I have seen that when we go to certain hospitals or certain wards, for example, certain types of music is played in the background. It's passive in the background. What it's doing is inducing a sense of tranquility, a sense of calm, sense of peace, and it's offering us some form of connect within ourselves, because it's about connecting back to ourselves. So music helps us to connect to that. So yes, I believe that Indian classical music has the power, has proven to have the power to induce mental well-being. And we don't all have to be musicians per se to experience that. Far from it. Um, we simply have to listen. It's an experience. It's not a language of analysis. It's a language of experience.
Lovely. Thank you, Yogeshji. I think we touched upon earlier the importance of different foundations, whether it be Western classical music, whether it be Indian classical music. So we have now a question from Narayanji Prabhu, who has asked, how easy or hard is it for Western classically trained musicians to adapt to Indian classical music?
That's a very good question, actually, and I can relate to that one very well from my experience in doing a stage production back in 2016. We had a team of Western musicians who were playing violins and violas and cellos, and they're all trained. They're all classically trained musicians, and they were actually asked to play Indian classical music on Western instruments. Their training meant that the transition was fairly easy. It wasn't overnight, it wasn't immediate, but they could do it. So, barring a few musical language issues that we overcame, they adapted to playing Rag Yaman and Rag Kirwani and Rag Lalit and Rag Jyoti and Rag Durga with equal ease that they could play Western composition. However, the one notable difference was, and this is something that Narayana may have observed himself as well, is that we provided written scores to all the Western musicians. So they had the entire music piece written in front of them so that they could play it from there. Whereas the Indian musicians' training from a young age was always to memorize everything. So all the compositions were in their head. When they heard a new composition, they would immediately set about memorizing it. If they heard a new piece that they had to use as in the performance, they would immediately set about memorizing it. And for them, that was the way of learning. And for them, that was absolutely the norm. If you put written music in front of those Indian musicians, they would be completely lost. They wouldn't know where they were reading from. Whereas the Western musicians would be completely lost without the script. However, having said that, I will highlight one anomaly. In the Indian film music industry, most of the instrumentalists who are referred to as session players, so they play scores of music for the song, for example. They are so adept and so well trained that they can come to a recording studio and a recording session, be given a piece of music probably 15-20 minutes before the recording. It's in front of them, and whilst the track is playing, they will quickly play their interludes and their pieces of music from a written score. Okay, so this is quite incredible. From a written score. Chennai Strings is one such orchestra, by the way, if anybody wants to look them up. Chennai Strings, incredible musicians, and they will play that with such ease. So there is a little bit of an anomaly where people who've been trained in the Indian tradition are equally adept at the Western tradition as well. So vice versa. But no, having a foundation certainly gives you the strength and the caliber to move from one to the other with reasonable ease. Absolutely.
Thank you, Yogesh. We have another question by Vibhasha Surunge. I've heard that Indian classical music is quite a mathematical framework. How true is this, and what effect does it have?
That's a very interesting question, Vibhashaji. I am not sure whether it is a whether it is a mathematical framework, but I do know that it does have it does have a structure, a very precise structure, which then lends itself to improvisation. So, for example, there are 7 notes in the Indian classical musical tradition, and if you take a rag, for example, any rag will have a minimum of 5 notes, and some rags will have all 7 notes. Now, the order of the notes make up the rag, so the ascending and the descending. For example, rag Bhupali has sa re ga pa dha sa and sa dha pa ga re sa. So 5 notes up, 5 notes down. Another rag has something, rag Durga, for example, is sa re ma pa dha sa, sa re sa dha pa ma re sa. Now, these structures are adhered to. This is the framework. Mathematical or not, they certainly have what I would call a musical distance, because between each note, there is a distance of sound or shruti or microtones. So those microtones, those musical sound distances give that rag a certain flavor. So there is a structure. However, once you have learned the rag, you are then allowed to improvise. So you may play the rag in a way that appeals to you and your nature and your temperament and the instrument you are working with. As long as you do not break the framework of the rag, meaning that rag Bhupali does not have the notes ma and ni, so you cannot use the notes ma and ni. There are exceptions. So there, the framework is rigid. However, outside of that framework, you're allowed to improvise, and most of the classical musicians improvise greatly and do so extremely well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yogesh. I think you've taken us on a whole journey of the sphere of music and, how this corresponds to, harmony within us, within music, and in the world around us as well. I think something that I have taken away is the fact that, it's not something to be intellectualized, like you mentioned. It's something to be experienced, and every single individual can engage with it as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you so much. And we wanted to ask if you had any final thoughts to share with us before we wrap up. Anything you want our students to take away?
Yes, I'd like to share one particular thing. It was a question that you and Ruthik both touched on earlier, and it's about music in our families, in our life from a young age. I work through Shruti Arts with a lot of adults who are music enthusiasts, who perhaps didn't have the opportunity to learn music, but very passionate, really wanted to learn to sing, but had no avenues, no access, didn't have the means maybe. And our community, and when I say our community in the UK, is full of very, very talented music enthusiasts. And one of the things that we do at Shruti Arts and try and do at Shruti Arts is make access to music and arts very accessible. We want to create that avenue to music and the arts because we believe that arts enriches life, music enhances the quality of the life. So we do a lot of initiatives, and one of the initiatives that we've undertaken in the last 8 to 9 years, and I think that we can all do this at our own level, is we've created something called the Indian Classical Choir. I say the classical choir because it has elements of classicism in it. It doesn't necessarily sing classical per se. And we love group singing. We've all had the experiences of devotional singing in our own temples, in our community, at home, or at parties and events and so on. But this type of group singing and choir singing brings people together. It's very, very enjoyable. And it gives you an experience of true classical, rich, traditional Indian music without having a formal background in Indian music or classical music, but to experience what it would be like to be a part of that journey. So far in the last 8 or 9 years, we've had at least 8 or 9 workshops, I think, at least 8 or 9 workshops. And in every workshop, we have 40 to 50 people take part and more waiting to take part. So I think that one of the things that we can take forward is that let's create access to the arts and music for people in our community, because we have amazing talent. We have incredible enthusiasts who need avenues and opportunities given to them. So let's do that. And I think then we will actually do a great service to music, and we'll do a great service in improving the quality of those people's lives as well.
What a wonderful thought to increase the accessibility and make sure everyone has the access to, the beauty that is music. Thank you again, Yogesh.
Thank you.
For all of our audience, just to mention that if you have an asked a question on Facebook, then don't worry if it's not been answered by Yogesh. Do keep an eye out on our social media channels, and hopefully we will have them answered very soon. I'm sure Yogesh will be happy to answer those later on.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And so we want to end off this Wisdom Wednesday by making sure that you guys are all aware that we have a number of different wisdom webinars that are on our social medias available to watch on a various different topics. So do go back and watch them, as well as this video on students and music, which you can watch back as well. So do keep sharing. Keep your eyes out for a new theme and webinar in September. And more information will be coming soon. So do keep your eyes out, and any questions, do get in touch. Thank you again to Ritik. Thank you again to Yogesh. Shubhratri to all, and we will end with a final Om. Om. Dhanyavad.